My name is Lena. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I was a mother. Now, I am just a woman living in a quiet apartment, trying to figure out who I am when I am not changing 4 bags or checking oxygen levels. I'm writing this because I need people to understand something. I need you to understand that grief isn't just about sadness. Sometimes grief is about anger. Sometimes the people who are supposed to hold you up are actually the ones kicking the ladder out from under your feet. This isn't a story with hidden meanings. I'm not going to use fancy words to describe how my heart broke. It just broke. That's it. But before I tell you about the house and the betrayal and the way my own parents looked at me like I was a stranger, I have to tell you about Ivy. Ivy was 7 years old. She had blonde curls that she lost during the first round of chemo and then grew back as a soft fuzz that she loved to rub her cheek against. She had eyes that were too big for her face, especially near the end. For 3 years, we fought. It was just me and her. My husband left when the diagnosis came in osteosarcoma, bone cancer. He couldn't handle the negative energy, he said. So, he packed a bag and left me with a 4-year-old who couldn't understand why her leg hurt so much. I didn't have time to cry over him. I had to become a nurse, a doctor, a cheerleader, and a mother all at once. Our house became our world. It was a small 2-bedroom place, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I had bought it with the inheritance from my grandmother years ago, before I even got married. It was the only thing I truly owned. When the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do, I brought Ivy home. That was the deal we made. She hated the hospital. She hated the smell of antiseptic and the beeping noises at night. She wanted her own bed, her own drawings on the wall, and the view of the oak tree in the backyard. So, I turned our living room into a hospice room. I moved the furniture out, brought in a hospital bed, set up the oxygen tanks, the morphine drip, everything. I slept on a mattress on the floor right next to her for the last 4 months. I didn't sleep in my own bedroom once. The end came on a Tuesday. It was raining. Not a storm, just a steady, gray drizzle that made the whole world look tired. Ivy had been sleeping for most of the last 2 days. The nurse had come in the morning, checked her vitals, gave me a sad look, and told me it wouldn't be long now. I spent that whole day holding her hand. Her hand was so small and cold. I talked to her. I told her about the time we went to the zoo, and she tried to feed her ice cream to a goat. I told her about the day she was born. I don't know if she could hear me, but I couldn't stop talking. I was afraid that if I stopped talking, the silence would take over, and the silence meant she was gone. Around 3 a.m., her breathing changed. It's a sound you never forget. It's called the death rattle. It sounds terrible, but the nurse told me it doesn't hurt her. It just sounds like she's underwater. I sat up on my mattress, grabbed her hand tight, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. You can go. Mommy is right here. You don't have to hurt anymore." And then she stopped. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't open her eyes and say a final word. She just took a breath, let it out, and didn't take another one. I waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. 10 seconds. Nothing. The silence that filled that living room was heavier than anything I have ever felt. It pressed down on my chest. I checked the pulse in her neck, just like I had learned. There was nothing. My little girl was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't wail. I just laid my head down on the mattress next to her hand and closed my eyes. I was so tired. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I just lay there with her body for hours, listening to the rain stop and the birds start to sing. When the sun started coming through the curtains, hitting the medical equipment and the dust motes in the air, I knew I had to move. I had to make calls. There are procedures. You have to call the hospice nurse. You have to call the funeral home. And you have to call your family. My parents lived about an hour away. We weren't incredibly close, but they were my parents. They had visited Ivy occasionally, but they always looked uncomfortable. They didn't like the sickness. My mother, specifically, had a hard time dealing with unpleasant things. She liked her life tidy, clean, and presentable. A dying granddaughter wasn't presentable. I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking, not from crying, but from the shock. It was 7 a.m. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. Hello. Her voice was crisp, awake.
Mom, I said.
My voice sounded like gravel. It's over. Ivy is gone. There was a pause on the other end. I waited for her to say, Oh my God, Lena, I'm so sorry. I waited for her to say, We're coming right now. I waited for her to cry. Instead, she let out a small sigh. Okay, she said. Then, immediately after, she asked, Have you called the life insurance company yet? I blinked. I looked at Ivy's body lying 3 feet away from me. What? The insurance, Lena, she said, her voice impatient. You need to report the death immediately to get the payout process started. Funerals are expensive, and you haven't been working. You need to get that paperwork moving today. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach that had nothing to do with the room temperature. My daughter had been dead for 4 hours. I hadn't even washed her face yet. And my mother was talking about paperwork. I haven't called anyone, Mom, I said, my voice flat. She just died. Well, get on it, she said. Your father and I will drive up. We should be there by tomorrow morning. There's a lot to do. Tomorrow? I asked. Why not today? We have a dinner appointment tonight with the Hendersons, she said, as if that explained everything. We can't just cancel last minute. We'll be there tomorrow. Just make sure the house is decent. Tidy up a bit. She hung up. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the screen. Tidy up a bit. My daughter was dead in the living room, surrounded by oxygen tanks and pill bottles, and she wanted me to tidy up. That was the first crack. That was the moment I should have known what was coming. But I was too deep in the fog of grief to see it clearly. I just thought she was being practical. That's how my mother was: practical, cold, efficient. I told myself she was grieving in her own way. I was wrong. The rest of that day was a blur. The hospice nurse came to certify the death. The funeral home came. Watching 2 men in suits zip my 7-year-old daughter into a black bag and wheel her out of her own home was the hardest thing I have ever done. I stood on the porch and watched the van drive away until it turned the corner. Then I was alone in the house. The house was so quiet. The hum of the oxygen machine was gone. The TV was off. It felt huge and empty. I walked back into the living room. The hospital bed was still there, the sheets rumpled where she had been. I sat on the floor where I had slept for months, and finally, I cried. I cried until I threw up. I didn't clean anything. I didn't tidy up. I fell asleep on the floor, surrounded by Ivy's things, her stuffed rabbit, her water cup, her half-finished drawing of a butterfly. The next morning, the sound of a car door slamming woke me up. I looked at the clock. It was 9 a.m. I stood up, my body aching. I was wearing the same sweatpants and t-shirt I had been wearing for 3 days. I looked like a ghost. The front door opened. My parents didn't knock. They had a key, for emergencies, gave to them years ago. Lena, my father's voice boomed. I walked into the hallway. I'm here. My mother walked in first. She was wearing a beige pantsuit, perfectly ironed. Her hair was done. She looked like she was going to a business meeting, not to comfort her grieving daughter. My father followed, wearing a polo shirt and khakis. I took a step forward, expecting a hug. I needed a hug so badly. I needed my mom to hold me and tell me that I did a good job, that I was a good mother. My mother stopped in the entryway. She looked at me, then looked past me into the living room where the hospital bed was. Her nose wrinkled slightly. Oh, Lena, she said. It smells like sickness in here. She died yesterday, Mom, I said, my arms falling to my sides. I know, she said, waving her hand dismissively. But we have to air this place out. My father didn't say anything to me. He didn't look me in the eye. Instead, he pulled something out of his pocket. It was a metal tape measure. I frowned. Dad, what are you doing? He walked past me into the living room. He extended the tape measure and started measuring the wall where the TV used to be before we moved the hospital bed in. Snap.
Whir.
The sound was loud in the quiet house.
Dad,
I asked again. Just checking the square footage of the living area, he muttered, writing something down in a small notebook. I think the tax records are off. Why does that matter right now? I asked, my voice trembling. My mother walked into the kitchen. I heard her opening cupboards. We need to see what we're working with, Lena. Now that the situation has changed. The situation? I followed her into the kitchen. You mean Ivy dying? Yes, she said, turning to face me. She opened the fridge, looked inside, and closed it with a sigh. There's no food in here. I haven't been shopping, I said. Mom, why is Dad measuring the living room? She looked at me like I was a slow child. Because we need to list the house, Lena. I froze. What? The house, she said slowly. We need to sell it. You can't live here alone. It's too big for one person and frankly, it's depressing. You need a fresh start. And the market is hot right now. If we list it this week, we can get a great price. I stared at her. I couldn't process the words. List it this week? Mom, I haven't even picked out a coffin yet. Ivy isn't even buried. That's exactly why we need to move fast, she said, pulling out her phone. You need money for the funeral, don't you? And you have debts. I know you put everything on credit cards to pay for her meds. Selling this place clears all of that. I'm not selling my house, I said. This is Ivy's home. This is where her memories are. It's a house, Lena, she said coldly. And technically your father and I co-signed the loan with you, remember? Our names are on the deed too. We have a say in this. That was true. When I bought the place, my credit hadn't been great, so they co-signed to help me get a lower rate. But I had paid the mortgage. Every single month. It was my money. You wouldn't, I whispered. We're doing this for you, she said, but her eyes weren't kind. They were calculating. She started tapping on her phone. I'm calling the agent. Her name is Sarah. She's very aggressive. She can probably get the listing up by Friday. Friday. I choked out. The funeral is on Saturday.
Perfect, she said.
People will be in town. Maybe some of them are looking to buy. I felt like I was going to throw up again. I turned around and ran back to the living room. My father was still measuring. He was measuring the space around the hospital bed where my daughter had taken her last breath. Move this bed, he said to me, not looking up. It's in the way of the wall. Don't touch it, I said. Lena, be reasonable, he said. The photographer is coming this afternoon. Photographer. I screamed. Today? Her body just left yesterday. We have to move fast, he said, echoing my mother. That was the moment I realized they hadn't come to grieve. They hadn't come to hold me. They had come to liquidate an asset. They looked at my daughter's death not as a tragedy, but as a vacancy. A closing of a chapter that freed up a piece of real estate. I stood in the middle of the living room, shaking. I wanted to fight them. I wanted to throw them out. But I was so weak. I was so incredibly weak from months of sleepless nights and the crushing weight of grief. I didn't have the energy to scream. And they knew it. They were counting on it. I stood in the hallway, watching my father dismantle the life support of my dead child. It wasn't a metaphor. He was literally unplugging the oxygen concentrator. That machine had been the soundtrack of my life for the last 6 months. It had a rhythmic chug-whoosh sound that let me know Ivy was still breathing. Now, my father was winding the cord around his elbow, like he was packing up a vacuum cleaner after a Sunday chore.
Dad, stop, I said.
My voice was barely a whisper. I felt like I was underwater. This is rented equipment, Lena, he grunted, not looking at me. Every day we keep it is another $50. We need to get it back to the medical supply company by 5 o'clock. He was right, technically. It cost money. But Ivy's scent was still on the plastic tubing. Her warmth was still in the sheets. I turned to my mother. She was standing by the wall where Ivy had taped up her drawings. There were dozens of them. Rainbows, butterflies that looked like blobs, and a picture of me and her holding hands. The paper was crinkled because Ivy's hands had been sweaty and shaky when she drew them. My mother was peeling the tape off the wall. Mom, I lunged forward. Don't touch those. She flinched, holding a drawing of a purple cat in her manicured hand. "Lena, look at this paint. It's chipping the drywall. We're going to have to spackle and repaint this entire room before the photographer comes." "The photographer?" I stared at her. "Mom, Ivy isn't even in the ground yet. You can't paint over her room." My mother sighed, the kind of sigh she used when I was a teenager and didn't clean my room. "It's not her room anymore, Lena." "Yes, it is," I screamed. It was the first time I had raised my voice. "It is her room. She died right there." I pointed to the empty space where the bed had been. My mother looked me dead in the eye. Her face was calm, almost bored. "It was," she said. That word hit me harder than a slap.
Was.
Past tense. In 1 second, she had relegated my daughter to history. She had turned my living, breathing child into a was. "We're doing this for you," she continued, crumpling the purple cat drawing and tossing it into a black garbage bag she had brought with her. "You can't live in a mausoleum. You need to move on. And to move on, you need to sell. To sell, we need this place to look like a family living space, not a hospital ward." She turned back to the wall and ripped down another drawing. Ryep. The sound was like skin tearing. I wanted to hit her. I wanted to grab the bag and run. But I was so tired. My legs gave out and I slid down the wall, sitting on the floor. I watched them. I watched my parents erase my daughter. For the next 4 hours, I sat there while they worked. They were efficient. My father hauled out the heavy medical equipment. He took apart the hospital bed frame. He boxed up the 4 poles. My mother packed Ivy's clothes. She didn't fold them nicely. She just stuffed them into cardboard boxes labeled "Donate." "We aren't donating those," I said weakly from the floor. "Well, you can't keep them, Lena. What would you do with size 6 pajamas?" She taped the box shut. Scritch, scratch. The tape gun was loud and aggressive. By 4 p.m., the living room was empty. The walls were bare. The floor was swept. It looked huge. It looked cold. It looked like a house I didn't know. "There," my mother said, wiping her hands on her pants. "Much better. The painter is coming tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. He's going to do a neutral beige. Revere pewter, I think. Buyers love gray tones." "I have to go to the funeral home," I said, standing up. My knees popped. "I have to pick out a casket." "Go ahead," my father said, checking his watch. "We'll stay here and wait for the carpet cleaners. Just make sure you pick something reasonable, Lena. Don't spend $5,000 on a box that's going into the dirt. We need to maximize the profits from the house sale to pay off your debts." I walked out the door without saying goodbye. I drove to the funeral home in a daze. I picked a small, white casket. It looked like a jewelry box. I paid for it with my credit card, which was almost maxed out. When I got back home that night, the house smelled like bleach and fresh paint. My parents had left, but they had left a note on the counter. "Lena, photographer coming at 10 a.m. Do not clutter the living room. Sleep in the back bedroom."
Mom.
I walked into the living room. The walls were already patched. The spots where Ivy's drawings had been were covered in white spackle, looking like scars. I lay down in the middle of the empty floor, curled into a ball, and tried to smell her. But I couldn't. I could only smell the chemicals. They had scrubbed her away. The next 2 days were a blur of misery. The listing went live on Thursday. I got a notification on my phone from Zillow. I clicked it, my hands shaking. There was my house. But it wasn't my house. The photos were bright and airy. They had used a wide-angle lens to make the living room look massive. They had digitally added a fire to the fireplace. The description read, "Charming starter home. This spacious family living room is a blank canvas, waiting for your memories. Freshly painted. Motivated sellers. Blank canvas." They called the place where my daughter fought for her life, where she cried in pain, where she laughed at cartoons, where she took her last breath, a blank canvas. I threw my phone across the room. It cracked against the wall. Friday came, the day before the funeral. My mother called me. "Good news," she said.
Her voice was chirpy.
"We have a lot of interest. The market is crazy. Sarah, the agent, thinks we should do an open house." No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. The funeral is tomorrow, Mom. I am burying my daughter tomorrow. I know, she said soothingly. But listen, Lena. The funeral is at 10 a.m. The burial is at 11:30. Then there's the reception. You won't be home all day. It's the perfect time. Are you insane?
I asked.
You want strangers walking through my house while I'm at the cemetery? It's efficient, Lena. You won't even be there. You won't see them. Sarah says Saturday afternoons are the prime time for buyers. If we miss this weekend, the listing will go stale. Do you want to be stuck with this mortgage for another month? Do you want to pay the electric bill on an empty house? I don't care about the electric bill, I screamed. I care about respect. Respect doesn't pay debts, she snapped. We're doing this. The open house is scheduled for 12 to 3 p.m. Just make sure you make your bed before you leave for the church. She hung up. I felt like I was going to explode, but I was powerless. Legally, their names were on the deed. They had invested in the property. They had the right, and they were using that right to trample all over my grief. Saturday morning was gray. It wasn't raining, but the air was thick and wet. I put on my black dress. It was loose on me. I had lost 15 pounds in the last month. I looked in the mirror. I looked old. I walked through the house one last time before leaving. The living room was staged. My mother had brought in a fake plant and put it in the corner where the oxygen tank used to be. She had put a bowl of lemons on the kitchen counter. It looked like a magazine. It felt like a lie. I drove to the church alone. My parents met me there. They were dressed in black, looking solemn. They played the part of grieving grandparents perfectly. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue when the pastor spoke about Ivy's courage. My father put his hand on my shoulder when we sang Amazing Grace. But I knew that in their pockets, they had their phones on silent, waiting for text messages from the real estate agent. We drove to the cemetery. It was a long drive. We stood by the open grave. The ground was muddy. I watched them lower the small white box into the hole. That was it. That was the end of Ivy. I threw a handful of dirt onto the casket. It made a hollow thud. As I was walking back to my car, Mrs. Higgins, my next-door neighbor, approached me. She was a sweet old lady who used to bake cookies for Ivy. She was crying. "Oh, Lena," she said, hugging me. "I am so sorry." "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins," I said. She pulled back and looked at me, confused. "But Lena, I have to ask, why are there so many cars at your house right now?" My blood ran cold. "What?" "I drove past on my way here," she said. "There were balloons on the mailbox. And a sign. And people were walking in and out. I thought maybe you were having the reception there. But you're here." I looked at my watch. It was 12:15 p.m. They had started the open house while I was standing over the grave. I looked over at my parents. They were standing by their Mercedes, talking to the pastor. My mother was checking her watch. I felt a rage build up in me that was so hot, it almost blinded me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. I walked over to them. My mother saw me coming and smiled a sad, practiced smile. "Lena, honey, are you okay? We should get to the reception hall." "You put balloons on the mailbox," I said. My voice was low, shaking. Her smile faltered. "What?" "Mrs. Higgins saw them," I said. "You scheduled the open house to start now." While we were putting her in the ground, my father stepped in. "Lena, lower your voice. People are watching." "Let them watch," I yelled. "Let them see what kind of people you are. Who does that? Who sells a house while the body is still warm? Who invites strangers into a dead child's room while her mother is at the cemetery?" "We are practical people, Lena," my mother hissed, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. "We are handling the business, because you are too emotional to do it. Someone has to pay for all of this. That house is an asset. Nothing more. Ivy is gone. The house is just wood and brick. Stop acting like a child." "I am not a child." I yanked my arm away. "I am a mother. And that was her home. It's sold," my father said. The world stopped. I looked at him. "What did you say?" It's sold, he repeated, looking bored. Sarah texted me during the service. An investor made a cash offer. Sight unseen, but he wanted to confirm the condition during the open house. It's full asking price. We accepted. You accepted? I whispered. During the service? It's a good deal, Lena, my mother said, opening her car door. We close in 30 days. You need to be packed and out by the end of the month. I stood there in the mud, surrounded by gravestones. My daughter was 6 feet under the dirt behind me, and my parents had just sold the only place where I could still feel her spirit, and they had done it via text message while pretending to pray. I hate you, I said. My mother paused. She looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. You're grieving, Lena.
You don't mean that.
You'll thank us later when the check clears. They got in their car and drove away. I drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, the open house was still going on. There were strange cars parked on the street. A couple was walking out of my front door, laughing. I sat in my car and watched them. I watched a man in a suit, the investor, probably, walk out onto the porch. He looked at the roof. He nodded. He looked happy. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to run inside and throw them all out. But I knew it was over. My parents had signed the papers. They had the power. I walked inside my own house. It was full of strangers. They were looking at the kitchen cabinets. They were checking the water pressure. I walked straight to the living room, to Ivy's room. A woman was standing there. She was pregnant. She was rubbing her belly and looking around the empty, freshly painted gray room. This is a nice room, she said to her husband. Lots of light. It would make a perfect nursery. I stood in the doorway, my black dress covered in cemetery mud. A little girl died here 3 days ago, I said. The woman froze. She looked at me, her eyes wide. The room went silent. Right there, I pointed to the spot where she was standing. That's where her bed was. She died of bone cancer. She screamed in pain in this room for months. The woman turned pale. She grabbed her husband's hand, and they hurried out of the room, then out of the house. I walked to the center of the room. I sat down on the floor, on the spot where my mattress used to be. I sat there until the open house ended, until the agent left, until the sun went down. I was alone. I had no daughter. And in 30 days, I would have no home. The 30 days passed like a countdown to an execution. Living in a house that you have already sold is a strange form of torture. Every time I walked down the hallway, I felt like a trespasser. My parents had kindly allowed me to stay until the closing date so I could pack, but they made it clear that this was a favor, not a right. I spent those weeks in a robotic state. I woke up, I went to work. I had taken a temporary administrative job at the hospital because I couldn't handle patient care yet, and I came home to pack boxes. 3 days before the closing, my parents came over for the talk. I assumed the talk was about the logistics of the move. I had rented a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was dingy. It smelled like old cigarettes, and the carpet was sticky, but it was all I could afford with my savings depleted. I was counting on the equity from the house sale to get me back on my feet. I had done the math. The house sold for $350,000. The remaining mortgage was around $200,000. Even after fees and commissions, there should have been over $100,000 in profit. That money was my lifeline. It was the money that would pay off the credit cards I maxed out for Ivy's treatments. It was the money that would allow me to take time off to grieve properly. We sat at the kitchen table. My mother had a manila folder. She always had a folder. So, my father started leaning back in his chair. The closing is on Tuesday at the title company. You don't need to be there. I don't. I asked, confused. I thought I had to sign the deed over. We have power of attorney for the property, remember? My mother said, opening the folder. From when we refinanced 2 years ago. We can sign for you. It saves you the stress. Okay, I said. I was too tired to argue about paperwork. So, how does the payout work? Will they cut a check to me, or wire it to my account? The kitchen went silent. The refrigerator hummed. My parents exchanged a look. It was a look I knew well. It was the look they gave each other when they had decided something and were just waiting to deliver the news. "Lena," my mother said, folding her hands on top of the file. "There isn't going to be a payout for you." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "The house sold for $350,000. I owe $200,000. The math is simple." "It's not that simple," my father said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious and businesslike. "You have to understand the risk we took. We co-signed that loan. Our credit was on the line for years. If you had defaulted, we would have been ruined." "But I didn't default," I said, my voice rising. "I paid every single month. Even when Ivy was sick. Even when I wasn't working, I used my savings. I never missed a payment." "That's irrelevant," my mother cut in. "Legally, the house is as much ours as it is yours. And practically speaking, we are the ones who managed the sale. We paid for the staging. We paid for the painting. We dealt with the agent. You forced the sale." I slammed my hand on the table. "I didn't ask you to do any of that. We did what was necessary," she said calmly. "And because we bore the burden of the risk and the management, we are keeping the proceeds. We're viewing it as a return on our investment. Plus, we're going to put it into a trust. For your future." "My future?" I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "I have $40,000 in credit card debt from Ivy's chemo drugs. I have no furniture. I'm moving into a dump. And you're stealing my equity for a trust?" "It's not stealing, Lena," my father said, standing up. "It's financial prudence. You are not in a state of mind to handle large sums of money. You're emotional. You'd probably donate it all to some charity or waste it on something foolish. We are protecting you from yourself." "I want my money," I said, standing up to face him. "It's not your money," he spat back. "It's ours. The check is coming to us. And that is final." I looked at them. I really looked at them. I saw the greed masked as concern. I saw the selfishness wrapped in parental guidance. They weren't protecting me. They were profiting from my tragedy. They saw the death of their granddaughter not as a loss, but as a liquidation event. "Get out," I whispered. "Lena, be reasonable," my mother started. "Get out," I screamed, grabbing a ceramic mug from the table and hurling it at the wall. It shattered, shards flying everywhere. They flinched. They looked at me with disgust, grabbed their folder, and walked out the door. "We'll see you on move-out day," my mother called over her shoulder. "Make sure the place is broom clean." Move-out day was raining. It seemed fitting. I didn't have much to move. I had sold the furniture I couldn't take. I had donated the rest. All I had left fit into the back of my old sedan. The last thing I took was the box. The box. Inside was Ivy's favorite blanket, the one with the stars on it. Her lock of hair that I cut before the funeral. Her urn, which was heavy and cold. And the few drawings I had managed to salvage from the trash bag my mother had filled. I stood in the empty living room one last time. The gray paint, Revere pewter, looked dull in the rain. The smell of the house was gone. It didn't smell like Ivy anymore. It didn't even smell like bleach. It smelled like nothing. It smelled like a financial asset. I walked to the spot where her bed used to be. I knelt down and touched the floorboards. "I'm sorry, baby," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't keep your home." I left the key on the kitchen counter. I didn't lock the door behind me. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't look back. The next 6 months were the darkest of my life. I lived in the apartment that smelled like smoke. I worked double shifts at the hospital, not in administration anymore, but back on the floor. I needed the exhaustion. I needed to be so tired that I couldn't think. I didn't speak to my parents. They sent me texts occasionally, updates on the weather, pictures of their garden, generic "hope you are well" messages. They never mentioned the money. They never mentioned the house. They acted as if nothing had happened. I blocked their numbers after the 3rd month. I was floating in a sea of grief, untethered. I felt like I had failed Ivy. I had failed to protect her home. But then the shift happened. It was a Tuesday night in November. I was working in the pediatric ICU. There was a boy in bed 4. His name was Leo. He was 8 years old, terminal leukemia. His parents were sitting in plastic chairs in the corner of the room. They looked like zombies. The room was full of machines, beeping, whirring, flashing. It was sterile. It was cold. Leo was crying. He wasn't in pain, he was scared. He kept asking to go home. "I want my dog," he whimpered. "I want my bed." His mother was crying too. "We can't, Leo," she sobbed. "We don't have the equipment at home. We don't have a nurse. It's not safe." I stood in the doorway, listening. I looked at the parents. They were terrified. They wanted to take him home, but they didn't know how. They didn't have the medical knowledge I had. They didn't have the support system. So, their son was going to die here, in a room that smelled like rubbing alcohol, surrounded by strangers. It hit me like a lightning bolt. Ivy died peacefully because I was a nurse. Because I knew how to set up the morphine drip. Because I knew how to suction her airway. Because I could turn our living room into a safe haven. Most parents couldn't do that. I walked into the room. I checked Leo's vitals. I looked at his mom. "He wants to go home," I said softly. "We know," she said, wiping her eyes. "But we can't. The doctor said he needs 24-hour monitoring." "What if he had it?" I asked. "What if you had a nurse who came to you?
Who stayed the night?
Who set everything up so you could just be his mom and dad, not his doctors?" She looked at me, hopelessness in her eyes. "Insurance won't cover 24-hour private nursing."
We checked. It costs thousands a week.
"We've already lost our savings." I nodded. I knew that reality. I finished my shift, but my brain was on fire. I drove back to my smoky apartment, but I didn't sleep. I sat at my small kitchen table with a notebook. I wrote down a name, Ivy Home. It wouldn't be a hospice facility. It wouldn't be a building where people came to die. It would be a movement, a network. The mission, to provide the medical equipment, the nursing staff, and the logistical support to allow terminally ill children to pass away in their own homes, in their own beds, surrounded by their own toys. And for those who didn't have a home suitable for it, like families living in shelters or cramped apartments or unstable situations, we would provide a home. A real house. Not a clinic. A house with a backyard and a kitchen that smelled like cookies and a living room that didn't look like a hospital. I wrote until the sun came up. I realized that my anger, the burning rage I felt toward my parents, could be fuel. They had stolen Ivy's home. I would make sure no other family lost theirs. I started small. I cashed out my own meager 401k. I started a GoFundMe. I told a simplified version of my story. Nurse mom honors daughter by helping others. It got some traction. I raised $5,000. But I needed more. I needed people to understand the why. I reached out to a journalist I knew from college. She wrote for the State Chronicle, the biggest paper in the region. I told her I had a story. We met at a coffee shop. She turned on her recorder. "Tell me about Ivy," she said. So I did. I told her about the curls and the bone cancer and the rain on the day she died. And then I told her about the parents. I didn't hold back. I told her about the tape measure on the morning after the death. I told her about the blank canvas. I told her about the open house during the funeral. I told her about the eviction. I told her about the theft of the equity. "You're sure you want to go on record with this?" the journalist asked, her eyes wide. This is brutal. It will destroy their reputation." "I don't care about their reputation," I said, my voice steady. "I care about the truth. People need to know that grief isn't always pretty and families aren't always supportive. And they need to know why I'm starting this foundation. I'm starting it because I know what it feels like to have the sanctuary of home ripped away." The article ran on a Sunday. It was the front page feature of the lifestyle section. The headline was simple but devastating. "The house that grief built. One mother's mission to bring dying children home after her own parents sold hers." The article was explosive. It detailed everything. It included the quote from my mother, "Memories aren't in the walls." It included the detail about the open house balloons while I was at the cemetery. By Monday morning, my phone was blowing up. But it wasn't my parents. It was strangers. It was donations. The GoFundMe jumped from $5,000 to $50,000 in 12 hours.
But the real impact was in the town.
My parents were prominent people. They were on the church council. My father was in the Rotary Club. My mother played bridge with the mayor's wife. They thrived on their image of being the perfect grandparents who had tragically lost a grandchild. The article stripped that away. I heard from Mrs. Higgins, my old neighbor. She called me, sounding breathless. "Lena, have you been to the grocery store?" she asked. "No, why?" "Your mother was there," she whispered. She was in the produce aisle. When Linda from the choir saw her, Linda turned her cart around and walked the other way. Nobody spoke to her. She left her full cart in the middle of the aisle and ran out to her car. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction in my chest. "And at the Rotary Club," Mrs. Higgins continued, "your father showed up for the lunch meeting. The president asked him to leave. Said it was bad for morale to have him there right now." The town was turning. They had read the details. They knew about the money. They knew about the cruelty. In a small town, you can survive a scandal, but you cannot survive being exposed as a monster to your own child. My parents were pariahs. And meanwhile, Ivy Home was growing. With the influx of donations, I was able to hire 2 part-time nurses. We took on our first case, Leo, the boy from the ICU. We brought him home. We set up his room. I sat with his parents and explained everything. When Leo died 3 weeks later, he was in his own bed, with his dog sleeping at his feet. His mother hugged me and said, "Thank you for giving us this time." That was the moment I knew I had won. Not the money, but something more important. I had taken the ugliest thing my parents did and turned it into something beautiful. But the universe wasn't done with my parents yet. Karma, as it turns out, is patient. But when it strikes hard. A year passed. Ivy Home had become a recognized nonprofit. We were looking for a permanent location for families who didn't have stable housing. I was busy, focused, and healing. Then, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a real estate agent. Not Sarah, the one who sold my house, but a different one. "Hi, is this Lena?" "Yes. I'm calling because I represent the current owners of 42 Oak Street. Your old house." My heart skipped a beat. "Yes. Well, the investors who bought it, they're in a bit of a bind. They gutted the kitchen and started renovations, but then the market turned, and they ran out of cash. They need to liquidate the asset quickly. They saw the article about your foundation. They wanted to know if Ivy Home would be interested in buying the property back. At a discount." I sat there holding the phone, staring at the wall of my office. My house. Ivy's house. Coming back to me. "Tell me the price," I said. We closed the deal 2 weeks later. I used the donation money. The deed was now in the name of the Ivy Home Foundation. I walked back into the house. It was a mess. Construction dust everywhere, no cabinets in the kitchen. But the living room was still there. I walked to the center of the room. I closed my eyes. "I'm back, Ivy," I whispered. "We're back." I didn't know it then, but this house was about to become the stage for the final act of my drama with my parents. Because while I was rising, they were falling. And they were falling fast. Buying back the house was only the first step. The real work was turning it back into a home. I spent 2 weeks scraping off the Revere pewter paint that my mother had loved so much. I repainted the walls a soft, warm yellow, Ivy's favorite color. I brought in a new hospital bed, but I made sure it had colorful sheets, not the stark white ones from the hospital. I hung drawings on the wall. They weren't Ivy's original drawings, those were gone, destroyed by my mother's efficiency, but they were drawings from other children in the pediatric ward who wanted to help decorate the new house. I placed the rocking chair back in the corner. I put the oxygen concentrator back in its spot. When I was finished, the room didn't look like a blank canvas for a real estate investor. It looked like a sanctuary. It looked like a place where a child could rest. While I was building, my parents were crumbling. News travels fast in a small town. Mrs. Higgins gave me the updates. Apparently, the trust my parents had mentioned was a lie. They hadn't put the money in a trust for me. They had put it into a high-risk real estate development deal in Florida. They thought they could double their money in 6 months. They didn't. The developer turned out to be a fraud. The project went bankrupt. They lost everything. The $100,000 profit from my house?
Gone.
Their retirement savings?
Gone.
Then came the foreclosure. Their own house, the big, pristine house where nothing was ever out of place, was taken by the bank. I didn't feel happy when I heard this. I didn't feel sad, either. I just felt a sense of balance. The scales were finally evening out. It was a Monday morning when I got the call from the property management company I had hired to screen applicants for the foundation. We were looking for our first family for the new Ivy home. Lena, the manager said, sounding awkward. We have a bit of a situation. What is it? We listed the property address online as housing available, immediate occupancy. We didn't specify it was for hospice care in the headline, just in the detailed description. We got an application this morning from a couple who, well, their names are Robert and Susan. My parents. I froze. They applied? Yes, the manager said. They are being evicted from a rental apartment across town. They have bad credit now, so no one will rent to them. They saw the address, your old address, and they applied. They put in a note saying they have sentimental ties to the property and hope the owner will consider them despite their credit score. I almost laughed. Sentimental ties. The audacity was breathtaking. Do they know I own it? I asked.
No.
The listing is under the Ivy Foundation. They probably think it's just a corporate landlord. They requested a viewing for today at 4 p.m. I looked at the clock. It was 1 p.m. Let them come, I said. I'll handle the showing myself. I arrived at the house at 3:30 p.m. I parked my car around the back, so they wouldn't see it when they pulled up. I went inside and sat in the rocking chair in the living room. At 4 p.m. sharp, a beat-up sedan pulled into the driveway. It wasn't their Mercedes. It was a rusted Honda that looked 20 years old. I watched through the curtains. My father got out first. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped. He was wearing a polo shirt that was stained. My mother got out next. Her hair wasn't done. She was wearing sneakers, not heels. They looked like strangers. They walked up the path. My father hesitated at the front door. He reached for the knob, then pulled his hand back and knocked. Come in, I called out. The door opened. They stepped into the hallway. Hello, my father called out. We're here to see the manager. He stopped. I stood up from the rocking chair.
They saw me.
Their eyes went wide. My mother actually gasped and put her hand over her mouth. Lena, she whispered. Welcome back, I said. My voice was steady. Come in. You wanted to see the living room, didn't you? They walked into the living room slowly, like they were walking into a trap. They looked around. They saw the yellow walls. They saw the hospital bed. They saw the medical equipment. They saw the drawings on the wall. It was exactly the way it had been the day Ivy died. My mother started to shake. She looked at the spot where she had peeled the tape off the wall. She looked at the floor where she had told me to tidy up. What is this? My father asked, his voice cracking. Why is it like this? This is Ivy Home, I said. I bought the house back. I turned it into what it should have been all along. A place for children to die in peace. My mother looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Lena, we didn't know. We didn't know it was you. I know you didn't, I said. If you knew, you wouldn't have come. But you're here now. Why did you apply? My father looked at the floor. The arrogance was gone. The businessman persona was gone. We have nowhere else, Lena. The apartment complex evicted us this morning. We have no money. No credit. We saw the listing. We thought, since we lived nearby before, maybe. You thought you could live here? I asked. We need help, my mother sobbed. Suddenly, her knees gave out. She literally fell to the floor, right in the center of the room. She was kneeling on the very spot where I had slept on a mattress for 4 months. Please, Lena. We are your parents. We made mistakes.
We know that.
But we are drowning. We just need a roof over our heads. Just for a few months until we get back on our feet. This house has 2 bedrooms, my father added, his voice desperate. We could stay in the back. We wouldn't bother you. We can help fix things up. I looked at them. I looked at my mother on her knees, begging for the very space she had deemed depressing and smelly a year ago. I looked at my father, who had measured this room for profit while his granddaughter's body was still warm. I felt a surge of emotion, but it wasn't pity, and it wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. "Stand up, Mom," I said. She looked up at me, hope in her eyes. "You'll help us?" "Stand up," I repeated. She struggled to her feet, leaning on my father. "Do you remember what you said to me in this room?" I asked. "Do you remember telling me that memories aren't in the walls? Do you remember telling me that I had to move on?" "We were wrong," my father said quickly. "We were trying to be practical. We handled it badly." "You didn't handle it badly," I said. "You handled it cruelly. You erased my daughter before she was even in the ground. You staged an open house during her funeral. You stole the money that was supposed to save me from debt." "We're sorry," my mother wailed. "We're so sorry." "I accept your apology," I said. Their faces brightened. "Thank you, Lena," my father said, taking a step forward. "Thank you. So, when can we move in?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You can't." The room went silent. The hope drained out of their faces instantly. "What?" my mother whispered. "You cannot live here," I said, enunciating every word. But you said you accepted our apology," my father stammered. "You own the house. It's empty. Why would you turn us away? We're family." "This house is not for you," I said. I pointed to the hospital bed. "This house is for a 7-year-old boy named Marcus. He has terminal brain cancer. He is moving in tomorrow morning. His parents are sleeping in the back bedroom. Marcus will sleep here." I walked over to the bed and smoothed the sheet. "This home is for dying children," I said, turning back to them. "It is not for healthy adults who made bad financial decisions." "But Lena," my mother screamed, "we will be homeless tonight. Do you want your parents to sleep in a car?" "I wanted to sleep in my own home after my daughter died," I said softly. "But you told me that was inefficient. You told me I needed a fresh start. Well, this is your fresh start." My father's face turned red. "You are a vengeful, ungrateful child. After everything we did for you." "You did nothing for me," I cut him off. "You co-signed a loan and then you stole the equity. That is not help. That is theft. And now you want to take a bed away from a dying child? You haven't changed at all." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The afternoon sun was shining, but inside, the air was cool and still. "Please leave," I said. "Lena, don't do this," my mother begged, grabbing my hand. I pulled my hand away. It was the same motion I had used at the cemetery. "The application is denied," I said. "Go." My father stared at me for a long moment. He saw something in my eyes that told him there was no use arguing. I wasn't the daughter they could bully anymore. I was the mother who had survived the worst thing imaginable, and I had come out the other side stronger than them. He grabbed my mother's arm. "Come on, Susan. Let's go." They walked out the door. They walked past the mailbox where they had once tied balloons for the open house. They got into their rusted Honda. I didn't watch them drive away. I closed the door. I walked back into the living room. It was quiet. The sun was hitting the yellow walls, making the room glow. It felt warm. It felt ready. Tomorrow, Marcus would come. Tomorrow, this house would be full of love, and pain, and tears, and laughter. It would be a home again. I sat down in the rocking chair and closed my eyes. I thought of Ivy. I thought of the silence after she died. And for the first time in a year, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace.